Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to talk with you. I'm sorry it's not in person, but glad we're all staying safe. So I wanted to start with a little bit of background, in case you're not familiar with To the Best of Our Knowledge, or TT Book for short. The show started in 1990, so last year marked our 30th anniversary. We've got something like 230,000 weekly listeners on 216 public radio stations around the country. We have something like 500,000 podcast downloads per 3 months. That's growing. Last year, we launched a spin-off micro-podcast called Bookmarks. Great writers talk about the books they love, books that changed their lives. We have an ongoing partnership with the nonprofit Center for Humans and Nature in Chicago to produce Kinship, a more than human podcast. This is about what changes when you start thinking of other species, other forms of life as kin. Our first episode was on eye-to-eye epiphanies, stories of people who have stared directly into the eyes of a wild animal and found it to be a profound experience. Those experiences, by the way, are a lot more common than you would think. The second episode was on plants as persons, about plant intelligence and the growing science of vegetal consciousness. The next one will be When Mountains Are Gods, about sacred mountains around the world. To the Best of Our Knowledge has always been a little hard for us to define, but basically, it's an audio magazine of ideas, or a thoughtful weekly. Each show revolves around a theme, usually a big question, like what sparks creativity? Is religion or faith hardwired in us? Is anger useful? Can we face climate change and still have hope? Each hour is made up of 4 or 5 interviews that reflect multiple ways of thinking about the particular topic of the day. We look for a diversity of worldviews and disciplines, so a good hour would have a scientist, a poet, and a historian, and ideally a range of personal stories and deep think or idea-driven interviews. I've been with the show from the beginning. I started it together with Steve Paulson, who is my husband as well as my professional partner. Jim Fleming was the original host, and I moved from full-time producing and interviewing to hosting when he retired. Oh, and we won a Peabody Award in 2005. And if you hear a bark, by the way, it's my pandemic puppy. So I decided to talk about curiosity today because it's the DNA of To the Best of Our Knowledge. And also because over the years, I've come to think of it as not just a trait, but a skill. So I'll try to explain. To begin with, of course, curiosity is innate. We're born curious. It's part of being human. And it's the key to learning anything, how we make discoveries and invent things. So if you think about, say, the great achievements in science and technology, and you think about people like Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Watson and Crick, Jane Goodall, they were intellectual geniuses, brilliant minds, and driven by, fundamentally, passionate curiosity, whether about the nature of space-time, or chemical elements, structure of DNA, or animal intelligence. But here's the thing. I think that we generally talk about curiosity as a fixed trait, when in fact, it's an ability, a habit of mind, that can be cultivated. Sometimes I wonder why we don't teach it in schools. I mean, we teach math, science, history, music, but we don't teach kids or adults how to be curious. We just assume that you either are or you aren't. But after more than 30 years as a public radio producer, interviewer, and host, curiosity is the one skill I've learned that I value the most, and that has brought me the most life satisfaction. You could say that it is the job to be professionally curious about anything, whether I want to or not. Here's how it works. One of our producers has been putting together a show on the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. It airs, or aired, this weekend. And we decide that there should be a nuts and bolts piece. Exactly how does the vaccine work? What is an mRNA vaccine? What are the biggest logistical challenges? And when will all this be over? I'm assigned to interview a science journalist, Sarah Zhang. She's a staff writer for The Atlantic magazine. Now, I am personally not all that interested in vaccine design. I didn't like science in school, and I'm kind of sick of COVID stories. But my job is to make this interesting so that you will keep listening, which means that I have to find something to be curious about. And for me, That turned out to be Sarah herself. So Sarah is Chinese American. She has relatives in China, including an aunt who works in healthcare. And as a science writer, she knew early on that there was this new virus in Wuhan that was probably worth watching. But as in many Chinese American families, it was her parents who took it seriously, way before anybody else in the US did. They knew it was coming because of what they were hearing from relatives in China. So they were stocking up on groceries and buying masks with their kids trailing behind them at Walmart saying, "Don't you think you're overreacting?" 2 months later, Sarah is in the slightly uncomfortable position of being a Chinese American journalist covering what the President of the United States insists on calling the China virus. There's a whole lot of human drama and emotional conflict there. I'm a former English major. I read a lot of novels. This could have been one of them. So I guess what I'm saying is that, at least in my job, but I think also in life, you can't sit around passively waiting for curiosity to strike. You have to push past the barrier of your own boredom and disinterest. You have to hunt for that little spark, that little quickening of interest, and then you feed it by asking questions. Lots of questions. That's the great gift of my profession, the license to ask questions. A lot of journalists feel that way. And over time, our radio studio has come to feel something like a sacred space to me. Whether my guest is sitting right in front of me or is a disembodied voice on my headphones, there's an unspoken contract on the table in front of us. The normal rules of social exchange are suspended. We may be strangers to each other, but for this half hour, we have each other's full attention. And I can ask you things that I don't even ask my friends. Do you believe in God? What do you think happens after death? What do you regret most? What matters most to you, and why? So cultivating curiosity means learning, or really relearning, how to ask questions. There's a book by, or actually 2 books by, a journalist, Warren Berger, and he writes about what he calls the lost art of asking questions. He thinks it's socialized out of us. Children start out asking hundreds of questions a day, he says. Just think of a toddler. But that questioning falls off a cliff when they go to school, where we're all praised for the right answer and scolded for the wrong one. Now, I was one of those good students in school, and so it took me a long time to relearn how to ask questions. I remember coming to Wisconsin Public Radio for the first time in the early 80s and being sent out with a microphone and a recorder to do a story. I was assigned to cover the mayor's press conference. This was one of Paul Soglin's many terms in office, and I was terrified. I was so afraid I would embarrass myself by asking something stupid that I hesitated and delayed until the whole press conference was done, and I had to go back and confess to my editor that I had not worked up the nerve to pose a single question. These days, of course, my kids tell me I'm so inquisitive. They keep poking me and hissing, "Stop interviewing!" There's a phrase I've been thinking about a lot lately. I learned it from UW-Milwaukee professor Anne Basting. She's a MacArthur genius, who's both a gerontologist and a theater professor. She works with dementia patients and their families, and she talks about learning to ask beautiful questions. She says, if you ask someone, "Do you remember that night when we did this?" or "Do you remember me?" or "my name?" there's only one answer. But when you're dealing with cognitive challenges or any kind of cognitive disability, the likelihood that that pathway is broken is really high. So if instead you shift and you ask what she calls a beautiful question, it can open up a new neural path, and it can become a shared path of discovery. So an example of a beautiful question. What is something you treasure in your home, and why? What is the most beautiful sound in the world, and can you make it? What does joy mean to you? What does it mean to grow up? What does it mean to grow old? In other words, a beautiful question doesn't have a wrong or a right answer. It's an invitation to tell a story, to imagine something new, to share an emotion. Beautiful questions are often a little playful. They convey delight. They're generative. And one of the things they often generate is a sense of wonder. So I mentioned that growing up, I never liked science, but I love interviewing scientists. I have hardly ever talked with one who didn't just easily and effortlessly drop into wonder, marvel at the beauty or the mystery or the complexity of life in the universe. Like, I remember talking with Francis Halsem. He's the lead scientist of the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory and one of the UW-Madison star scientists. And I remember I was asking him all these basic questions, like, what exactly is a neutrino and where do they come from? And I remember asking if these tiny ghost particles can pass through polar ice that's a mile deep, and if they're all around, are they also passing through us? And he held up his hand, and with this huge smile, he said, 100 trillion may pass through this every second. Mind-blowing. I mean, science is a way of asking questions or wondering about the universe. Maybe there's a reason wonder is both a noun and verb. There's another reason I wanted to talk about curiosity today, and that's the political climate we're living in. Epic levels of polarization. Families and friendships broken over politics. Each side demonizes the other. We read and we interact and we explore the world increasingly through confirmation bias. It's a world of yes or no questions. You're right or you're wrong. And so I want to suggest that what we need in this time more than ever is to practice curiosity. Because it's really difficult to be both angry and curious simultaneously. I learned that from a wise and gifted HR director, Barbara Duholm. I was lucky enough to work at Wisconsin Public Radio when she was there, and she had this one magic question she deployed to disarm conflict. So say you went in to see Barbara, and you were going to rant about a colleague who said or done something egregious. At some point, Barbara would pause and say, I wonder why he or she said that. And you would stop in your tracks, realizing that you didn't know. You had been too caught up in being angry and right to even wonder. So, being curious. It's a way of liberating your imagination. It's an antidote to boredom, a gateway to wonder, a life-enhancing habit of mind, and it's all yours to cultivate. Thanks.